everybody, and welcome to your delayed post-daily news update here on Thursday, March the 3rd. I am John Pollock, alongside Wai Ting, chatting at you later than usual, but here we are. Hello, Wai.
Hello, John, and thank you, everybody. Those of you who've been in the chat room waiting for quite a while now. We are going live right after the conclusion of Pat McAfee's interview with Vince McMahon.
Yes, it's the Pat McAfee post-show.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes. So what did you think about the Tom Brady analysis? What's his next move going to be?
I missed all that.
Oh,
I missed all the actual football talk.
Well, yes. Vince McMahon did make his way live into their studio in Indianapolis, Indiana, and ended up doing like a 90-plus minute interview in studio. I will say, coming out of it, you got a real interview out of this, like probably the lengthiest that we have seen, especially in a live setting. You go back to the Austin one, which was back in 2014, but this one, it seemed like Vince McMahon was very much relaxed. I think that is certainly one of the traits people look at Pat McAfee, of someone that can really disarm the guest, to be very open. This was not hardly an investigative journalistic piece with Vince McMahon, but at the same time, it was someone Vince McMahon was extremely comfortable with and spoke about. And in terms of storyline, like really the only aspect of that was the announcement of having Pat McAfee in a match against a suitable opponent, which, of course, we had reported last week. That suitable opponent apparently will be the man that was in studio with Pat McAfee.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, once your report came out and other people's reports came out about the two of them having a match, expectations for this interview that was announced last week kind of went from, oh my God, he's doing another, one of these sort of Bob Costas types of interviews, to, well, what sort of angle are they going to create? And evidently, like, pretty much it was, I think, as much of a standard interview, I suppose, as standard as you would get for a Vince McMahon interview. Of course, though, with somebody who's incredibly cordial to him, somebody who's an employee of his, and somebody who is a big fan of his. So I wouldn't necessarily would say it was confrontational at all, but
that would be the last word I would use for this interview.
But I mean, there were certain interesting topics that were broached that I think we could discuss.
Certainly. I think there was a lot to take from this particular interview. And again, like Wai summarized it pretty much, like Pat McAfee was largely for 90 minutes like in awe of this individual. And I believe that to probably be very genuine. Like, it is clear that he looks at Vince McMahon as someone that has been a mentor throughout his role in WWE, somebody that he has a high amount of respect for. And the fact that this guy came to his studio to do this. So I guess some of the interesting subjects that were discussed. First of all, Vince McMahon noted that he is going to induct The Undertaker into the Hall of Fame. So this will be a rare on-screen appearance for Vince McMahon outside of the boardroom with Austin Theory. So that becomes, really the main thing for the Hall of Fame is Vince McMahon inducting The Undertaker. That is the focus of that special.
Yeah, and up until this point, still no other word on other inductees or people going into the Hall of Fame. So what do you think, John?
I mean, I've heard buzz about other inductees. I don't have them confirmed, but I have heard of like the idea of like others going in as well. But I guess that remains to be seen once those announcements are to be made, and they do have a month to go until the Hall of Fame. What do you think about that in terms of having a more extended class than just the one in Undertaker?
Well, I mean, the idea has been discussed about solely focusing on the Undertaker for the broadcast, but I mean, that would kind of go against their tradition. So if they wanted to round out the class, sure, but I don't know how big of a whatever. All the attention is going to be though on Vince McMahon, doing a bit of public speaking that he rarely does these days. He talked about how it's going to be really difficult for him because he actually likes the guy and he sees him as a family member. So. It's a rare appearance from Vince McMahon on camera in a public setting like that. So he doesn't even appear like typically. He doesn't even like people thanking him in these halls of fame speeches. So, yeah.
Do you get the sense, like watching this, the big Vince McMahon project is that Netflix series, and the idea, much like when the Undertaker series came out, of seeing Vince McMahon do the media rounds and do more of these extended interviews. Like, this almost felt like here is a guy who has been extremely reclusive over the majority of the last decade. He is not some public spokesman for the company like he once was. Those, Bob Costas and Michael Landsberg interviews, I mean, we're decades removed from those. But in terms of having a big promotion for that Netflix series, like if I'm Netflix, if I'm Bill Simmons, I want Vince McMahon out there promoting this thing.
It certainly is very possible. Yeah, simply him being on TV as a somewhat semi-regularly as part of these Austin Theory segments. I mean, maybe it's partially that as well. The reports of him possibly having a match at WrestleMania. I mean, what a way to possibly end a documentary, right? So it could be that. I really do think, so much of it though is in service of whatever he might have planned for Mania.
So a lot of the interview was about trying to get into like Vince McMahon's philosophy on running a business. Again, extremely complimentary to Vince McMahon. And it was sort of like Pat McAfee brought up subjects that you would, maybe be somewhat surprised at. But I mean, were couched in such a way that were just very, essentially spoon feeding these to Vince McMahon. He did not take the bait and make any comment about AEW. It was kind of this long question about competitors, citing WCW, then TNA, and now there's AEW, and just, it just became like an overarching theme of enjoying confrontation and that thing, but really nothing to say about, any other wrestling competitors, and really, as you would expect, distancing himself from the professional wrestling industry that, I think it feels much better to be a WWE superstar. That sounds so much better than a professional wrestler, and wanting, like, there's WWE and then there's everyone else that is attached to what historically is labeled as professional wrestling.
Fall very much in line, I think, with the corporate line or what we've heard from Nick Khan and from what we've heard in these investors' calls of them. Like kind of not looking at professional wrestling competition as competition, and instead kind of giving the impression that they had bigger fish to fry. But we didn't even get, though, of course, any sort of like blood and guts sort of comment. Nothing directed at AEW whatsoever. And I mean, I wasn't expecting there to be any, honestly.
Yeah. They talked a little bit about, or Vince kind of invited, like, talking about sort of the origins of, taking over this from his father, mentioning his father was part of the NWA and then buying the company. And the way that this had worked was in June of 1982, they made the agreement, and it was going to be $1.6 million that Vince McMahon would pay Vince Sr. and his partners, and they'd be in installments. So it was like the first payment of just over $230,000, and then the remaining like $769,000 would be made in these installments over the next year. And if he defaulted at any point, it would just revert back to his father and that ownership. And they did make the final installment in June of '83, and that's when he officially had the company. But did talk about, the big show at the end of 1983 going into St. Louis, which was Hulk Hogan's first show after he raided him from Vern Gagne, and then the expansion that followed in 1984 with WrestleMania 1 being one that he put a sizable amount of his money into. And he didn't talk about this specifically, but that also coincided with when they got off of TBS and got that $1 million for the slots on WTBS after Black Saturday the previous year. So that was all kind of, that didn't seem like that's really, like, Pat is not going to be your historian that's going to be diving too deep into that, but Vince kind of volunteered some of that information. He discussed the Jim Ross story that has, I think, like, Vince put his own kind of interpretation of the story. I had not heard, he seemed to make it a lot more.
Had you heard the story before?
Jim Ross has definitely told the story about being in a urinal or something and overhearing like this plot to like kill Vince McMahon. Now, Jim Ross, I've never heard him talk about that he was squatting on a toilet with cowboy boots on and still having to go to the bathroom. And that really felt like Vince McMahon and his toilet humor spicing up a story for maximum entertainment value.
It could. Who's to say whether or not it was, but I mean, of course,
He was also quick to note that Jim Ross had no concern for Vince McMahon's health and safety. He didn't tell him that for years, and Jim Ross was only concerned about him being labeled as an accomplice by overhearing this. He had no concern about my well-being.
In some ways, you can interpret this as maybe, somebody speaking about a longtime friend in a friendly way. In another way, you could see it as a form of maybe, a continued sort of public slandering of one of his, the most beloved commentators of all time. But it was a story he chose to tell on this show.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very deep relationship you can go into, and in Jim Ross's last book, I think you can certainly see like there's almost as much admiration as there is friction. I think in that it's a very complex relationship between Vince McMahon and Jim Ross. He talked about his philosophy of becoming a better business person after the company went public in 1999. That he did not have to make decisions with his heart any longer. He could just think of it as a business, and it's nothing personal, and that athletes seldom take responsibility when things don't work out and tend to blame others. And Pat McAfee said, yep, that describes us athletes. Yep.
The idea of maybe Vince McMahon's philosophy as far as running his business goes changing after the company went public is probably something that I don't hear discussed as often. But clearly, from an answer like this, it was a very pivotal point for him. And really, I think when you look at the on-screen product, maybe a pivotal point for, the way that he started to tell his stories after that, too. And of course, what immediately comes to mind is Saudi Arabia and the controversial, ethically, questionable decisions that he makes. And I suppose, a very blanket reasoning for a lot of these practices, or letting however many people go, for him will probably be what he said here, that he has the business, the shareholders, maybe in his thoughts more than his heart.
Yeah. And the relationship with Saudi Arabia, maybe that surprised some that Pat McAfee would bring that up. But again, this could not have been a question that was asked in more flattering terms to Vince McMahon than going to Saudi Arabia. And have you witnessed changes in the culture in Saudi Arabia since going to the country? And Vince McMahon pretty much just likened fans in Saudi Arabia like everybody else. And again, whenever we discuss this is not about the people of Saudi Arabia. This is being in business with the government of Saudi Arabia. And I mean, comes the day that WWE is severing its broadcast relationship in Russia because of what is going on. So, I mean, it seems to be philosophy for one part of the world, and then not for like another regime that is paying you such an extreme amount of money for these shows. But I wouldn't say it was a subject they went all that deep into, and Vince McMahon just made it kind of like Saudi Arabia is just like everywhere else.
I think it's somewhat surprising that, Pat McAfee at least felt the pressure maybe to bring up the topic. I have to imagine maybe heading into this interview, there was probably a level of like, the audience wanting to make sure that he wasn't just going to deliver a completely softball interview. And depending on your interpretation, maybe this was a very softball interview, but he didn't have to bring up Saudi Arabia, and he did. And the
he
fact
didn't
that
have
did,
to, but it was an absolutely non-confrontational question.
Of course. And I wouldn't have expected anything different from somebody who's going to be appearing on his show, from somebody who's his commentator.
That's all. It's just like, listen, that's great that you brought up the topic, but it's like at the same time, it's like it was not designed to be a probing question, or that I'm going out of bounds here with this question. Like, it was a very safe question. Let's just
it was in line with the company speak that we are there to propel change, to propel unity globally. And of course, not mentioning the incredible amount of money that is being made. And Vince describing Saudi fans as, they're just like any other fans. We're there to entertain. Of course, again, with no kind of mention of the exchange of dollar figure that's there, and nor did I really expect it. He did also mention the line about how culture is culture, and we have to respect that. Of course, but what's also very interesting is just, this all comes amidst, the Russia news.
Yeah. Culture and like human rights violations are, to me, separate things. But nonetheless, he talked a lot about, they got into quite a discussion about like the origin of stupendous. And I found this to be kind of interesting to hear Vince McMahon's thinking on the word stupendous. It's not used very often. This is all about branding. It's not part of everyday speak. And then that led to like his discussion about how his brain has multiple wheels working at once. Like he can be in a conversation, and even right now, another wheel of my brain is working, and sometimes even a third wheel is going. So he's got 3 competing wheels that are going at once.
The man has a tricycle in his head. And it's spitting at all times. Yeah,
this is amazing.
It was really fascinating hearing him talking about stupendous. And I mean, what it seems like is his philosophy is that, it gets people talking, and that's certainly been the case. Yeah, we're all talking about how weird it is. And it gives you some insight into why this guy would have been okay with having Great Balls of Fire be the name of one of his pay-per-views.
People don't ever talk about balls. They don't talk about balls enough. It's about branding.
Yeah. Some people might think about that sort of thinking and be like, wow, he's a genius. Yeah, he's right. People are talking about it. And others would be like, why would you tank your company name like that? Why would you make this thing sound so stupid? There are surely better ways of getting people talking. But nonetheless, it was a fascinating answer.
I will say one thing I took from this, and it was, when I first started working in radio, it was always you can't swear on the air, and it was like I always had an understanding for that. And then we started going when we started on satellite radio, and it was like, well, you can swear as much as you want, and I was so against that because I just felt it sounded so cheap. And then it was discussing with like one of the program directors there of it's not so much about the word, it's about the fact that you have the ability to swear and you're not so focused on what you have to say. And it kind of clicked with me there. And I heard it like firsthand with certain interviews where it was like a guest would swear and they'd immediately catch themselves. And then when you inform them, that's fine, you can say whatever you want. It was almost like they relaxed. And I certainly felt that in this interview with Vince McMahon. Like, he's swearing, Pat's swearing, and it's just like we're able to be laid back here and not be worried about everything we say. And you got an incredibly relaxed interview here with Vince McMahon. And again, like I think like that is a testament to the host here in Pat McAfee that, listen, it's when you have the ability to have access to a Vince McMahon, there's obviously going to be like Pat McAfee, as you mentioned, Wade, this is a man that works for Vince McMahon. This is not Bob Costas sitting down with Vince McMahon.
It's not even Stone Cold Steve Austin sitting next to Vince, because I think Stone Cold, like Austin, has a much more confrontational. I feel like Austin for his interviews feels like he has much more of a obligation to satisfy the listener rather than satisfy Vince McMahon. And I think with this McAfee interview, it was more about, wow, we got this big celebrity on our show. Let's kind of make him happy that he's here.
And that's what you have to look at. Like you can, if I was interviewing a Vince McMahon, yeah, I would have a line of questioning. But guess what, folks? I don't think I'm ever sitting down with Vince McMahon. So that's what you have to look at is that Pat is getting this opportunity it's like it was that or nothing. And you got 2 hours of Vince McMahon, essentially. So that's those are the kinds of interviews that someone the level of a Vince McMahon is going to do.
What did you think about when Pat McAfee brought up Succession and how he says people often draw, like, this was essentially Pat's way of presenting the topic of family and without. I
thought it was
really
a real
naming
clever way to try and get into the palace intrigue of the McMahon family. First of all, Vince McMahon nodded his head like he has heard of Succession, which he has not watched Young Rock. That was clear when he was asked about what he thought about his character on Young Rock. Has never watched it. But Succession, it seemed like he at least has heard of the show. And then, he explained how he's actually said this before about that he probably expects even more out of his family members than his other employees. And you could certainly read between the lines here and probably tie this into the recent Shane McMahon news. But ultimately, you have to do the right
Triple H news.
Or Triple H, you can extend it to both. Yes, that you have to do the right thing for the business. So I'm sure that was an answer that will get a lot of attention and people decoding what that means. But I think it was straightforward. He has a high bar, and I think that when you look at Shane and Paul Levesque, that they have been You know, if you're talking about who's up, who's down in terms of internal WWE figures, they have not been up over these last few months.
No, they have not. No, but you know, I thought it was. I could believe that it's truthful. You know, certainly looking at the way he's treated NXT and the recent ousting of Shane McMahon will really kind of tell you all of that. But it's also
it was begging for a follow up on Shane McMahon and just throwing his name out there. Like again, doing this kind of interview, like all of it is like technique, and it could simply be you introduce a topic that you don't have to be confrontational, but your subject. They'll go in the direction more often than not that you want them to. You just introduced the name Shane McMahon. Vince is comfortable. He's an hour into this. He may take that topic and he's going to arrive at the place you want without you having to be like ask a very personal question.
I wonder. Yeah, I wonder if like, you know, this was the type of interview with Vince being in this mood, like if the topic was brought up by maybe not just Pat, but like one of his co-hosts, would he have entertained it? Would he have given a substantial answer? Not really sure, but I mean, you know, I think the answer would have been pretty similar to what he said here, in that he ultimately has the business in mind first of all, and you know, regardless of what his heart says, regardless of his relationship to family, I mean, whatever is best for business is what he's going to go with.
Yeah, and then towards the end, I mean, a lot of it was more like his crazy training schedule, like training until like 3 a.m. They did bring up like the early days of COVID and running at the performance center, saying we did testing to keep everyone safe. I mean, that was not the case when things began. It took them several months before there was testing, and there was plenty of outbreaks in WWE, but that was not going to be challenged. But there you go.
He also talks about, you know, I think he said this before, but he says we don't need focus groups because we have a focus group every night. So, I mean, he does continue to profess to listen to the fans, except the internet audience who can be biased and harsh. He never listens to them.
Yes. You know, internet audience it's such a crutch for some of these that you can just, well, the internet says this, and it's such a demonization of such like a large swath of your audience. I feel it's lazy when it's just constant. You group like it's this angry message board group, and that's what the internet is.
I don't doubt that there's some truth to it. Yeah, we could be very harsh and I mean biased. Okay, whatever. But there is.
I also
bias.
see ridiculously positive like internet where it's like that's not
whatever.
truthful either. Like you hopefully look for some balance, which by and large I think there's a lot of balance, but that's another rant for another.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to, you know, maybe like expand so much out of a little comment that he says, but it's, you know, it continues to maybe widen that divide between, you know, that your quote unquote internet fan and what the WWE product that Vince McMahon is producing is. And AEW, on the other hand, it seems to be a company that is completely built on that internet fan. Yeah,
it's a great comparison. So, I mean, anything in closing, just in terms of what was covered? Like, it's a lengthy interview. I wouldn't say any one particular subject was like some earth-shattering reveal of anything from Vince McMahon. I think in terms of, you know, because it is Vince McMahon, this will create a lot of discussion and headlines coming out of it. But I wouldn't say there was anything that was like jaw-dropping or really going too deep into any one specific topic or story that, you know.
What about the story of him using street psychology to
trailer park psychology?
So the story is that Vincent really needed like a grade change from like a B- to for B+ to A- to be able to graduate with Linda or something to that effect. So using street psychology, he found the addresses of his professors and he visited their home to have a conversation with them about changing their grades. And one of the professors gladly did it. The other shut the door on him and did not do anything about it. But he says that's how he graduated.
Yeah, so. That sounds right on the doorstep of legality.
A long time ago.
Showing up at the home address
Statute of limitations,
your professor.
Sure.
So there you go. That was the Vince McMahon interview, and I guess we will get the follow up on TV about the direction for WrestleMania coming out of this. But I mean, no Austin Theory on this, and I mean the way they pushed it on Monday was the idea of potentially Austin Theory showing up and really trying to drive you towards this interview with the idea that it was going to be like an HBO Sports kind of interview where Vince McMahon might snap.
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
think would have played off really poorly just in this trying to fabricate that and give like like the Mr. McMahon character that this would like morph into or something. I think it had been very awkward.
I think so too, especially when the expectation was there. I think we're dealing with a different time now where people are going to be that much more critical, and people are going to be that much more to surprise and get them off guard. So probably better off keeping the storyline stuff in the story on TV.
All right, we've got some other stories to talk about, and we mentioned it off the top there that WWE has announced it is terminating its partnership with its Russian broadcaster Match. Press release was sent out today that WWE has terminated its partnership with Russian broadcaster Match and shut down WWE Network in Russia effective immediately. The move eliminates access in Russia to any WWE programming, including the company's weekly Raw, SmackDown, and NXT shows, its on-demand library, and all of its premium live events, including WrestleMania 38. Of course, this comes as Russia is in the midst of their ongoing invasion of Ukraine, and this is many businesses that are ending their ties with Russia. But I do think it is worth also looking at this statement that was issued in October of 2018. WWE has operated in the Middle East for nearly 20 years and has developed a sizable and dedicated fan base. Considering the heinous crime committed at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, the company faced a very difficult decision as it relates to its event scheduled on November 2nd in Riyadh. Similar to other U.S.-based companies who plan to continue operations in Saudi Arabia, the company has decided to uphold its contractual obligations to the General Sports Authority and stage the event. Full year 2018 guidance is predicted on the staging of the Riyadh event as scheduled.
Of course, yeah, yeah. When news of this came out, and really a rare move, I think, by the WWE to perhaps act politically by going as far as pulling content from a particular country over, a political story. You can't help but look at what one hand is doing and looking and judging the other, and asking where's your ethics and where's your morality when it comes to Saudi Arabia. People are right to be very skeptical about a story like this because I mean it's not just the WWE that's pulling their stuff out of the country. It's really many major North American companies that are doing the same. And is this simply WWE acting because they feel an ethical duty, or are they just trying to follow suit to avoid PR nightmare?
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep and involved story of what is happening in Russia, and however you want to view that as well, in terms of like the people of Russia, many of whom that are also opposed to what their government is engaging in as well. But I was semi-surprised to see that WWE they do not often take some kind of a political stand on something, and whether there is more to that story that remains to be seen. We continue to have the fallout from the Ring of Honor story from Wednesday night, where Tony Khan announced that it will be wholly owned by an entity set up by Tony Khan. He has purchased Ring of Honor. There's been a lot of reaction to this and still a lot of questions. I have reached out to people in Ring of Honor, and at least no one willing to speak right now on the record that I've heard back from. But I guess the biggest question is the time slots on the Sinclair affiliates. Those slots were not mentioned at all in the press release in terms of the assets that are being acquired by Tony Khan, and I think that would be the big question. And if not, what becomes of Ring of Honor? Because it was certainly presented as an entity to continue. The video library is one thing, but also having they cite production equipment, and the fact that Honor Club, whatever you want to look at that, is technically part of this as well. And what is that subscriber base even at this point? It's not a service that I think I could imagine a whole amount of people holding on to over this past year, but that does exist.
It does, yeah. I'm sure a lot of these things are being internally discussed right now, or if not already, have had decisions made about. I mean, it's interesting that it's again a Tony Khan owned operation, which is separate from AEW. So that kind of gives you maybe some faith that the shows will continue separately and on their own, and maybe as its own entity as a company, perhaps even with its own crew, or like will it simply be absorbed under AEW, and does Tony license it to AEW? I have no idea. There are a lot of different questions, but of course, we can expect a high amount of synergy between the brands.
Yeah. I had heard through one person that it sounds like a meeting was held on Wednesday that just informed the group about the sale before it was announced on television. Tony Khan said in his very speech on Wednesday that the deal was signed yesterday. So that also has to bring up the question way of if this deal was finalized on Wednesday, this announcement had been promoted for a week, that you would figure there was, if this did not get finalized, I'm sure Tony Khan, as Chris Harrington alluded to in the WrestleNomics interview, he's got lots of irons in the fire. That could we expect another announcement? Everyone is kind of focused on is there a streaming deal coming? Is there an HBO Max streaming deal coming as well? That could follow this. That may have been on the go ready in case this ROH deal did not close in time.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah. I mean, or was it simply that he was so confident in the ROH deal that he, felt like he could have announced it a week ahead? I'm not sure, but I can say that, there are a lot of rumors that he was going to announce the streaming deal, and in fact, people being surprised that he didn't yesterday. But I think in either case, we can probably say with this move, acquiring ROH, that, if not immediately, it'll be in the near future where he'll announce something similar to that.
Mm-hmm. And as well, Supercard of Honor becomes a big focus. What does that show look like? I know there's a lot of questions being asked about that show and what is going to become of that show on April 1st. They've announced 3 matches so far. They have a few talent announcements for it. But what happens with that show? Because that would essentially be a peek into the first kind of vision of what this new ROH is going to look like.
It suddenly become, perhaps outside of WrestleMania, maybe even to some more so than WrestleMania, the most important show of WrestleMania weekend. I would expect Tony Khan to make an appearance, maybe to give a statement at a show like this. It is his first official show with Ring of Honor as an owner. But from what we've heard, people have the original crew has still been working on the show up until yesterday. Do they stick around to finish it?
The new logo, Way. There's a new logo that they're supposed to unveil.
Yeah, what happens to the new logo? Does Tony, if he doesn't like it, do they change it? Do they go back to DJ Z's drawing? Yes. If I'm Tony Khan, I feel like he's probably a longtime fan from the message board days. He's probably nostalgic for that logo.
Could be, yeah. That could be a major change. But yeah, still plenty of questions. I'm sure that this week you're going to see a lot of FaceTime of Tony Khan in Orlando around the pay-per-view, that this will be a major topic of discussion as he is doing media and potentially doing some media scrums either before or after the pay-per-view on Sunday. But I think I hope there's a formal press setting that they can further go into details when they're ready to release them about ROH. Let's continue on, because the match that everyone was awaiting is now official. Drew McIntyre versus Happy Corbin, which is scheduled for Saturday of WrestleMania weekend. It is official. So Drew McIntyre, Happy Corbin on the Saturday night of WrestleMania.
Oh, thank goodness. Now I know which show
really,
to avoid.
Really regretting that you didn't make that flight trip, those flight plans for Dallas, aren't you?
Listen, I'm sorry. Ronda Rousey, I think, is great. Becky Lynch and Bianca Belair, I think that'll be awesome. But if I'm having my choice, I feel like Sunday is shaping up to be the more interesting show with Brock and Roman Reigns, and presumably at least either this Pat McAfee thing or Steve Austin potentially.
I think you're going to get this stuff spread out. We only have the Reigns Lesnar official for Sunday, right?
I think so.
I don't think they've announced anything else for the Sunday. They have, Saturday, they've announced 4 matches, I think, at this point. So, yeah, I would imagine some of the big stuff they'll spread out between the two.
Do you know what show is doing better right now, ticket wise? ticket sales?
I mean, the last check, I think it was night 2 by a small margin. Like they're very close in terms of tickets out. It's not like one is dramatically ahead of the other.
Yeah, so maybe just giving a bit more of a push for night 1 with some of these announcements so far.
All right. For ratings notes, NXT on Tuesday night did 551,000 viewers, 165,000 in the demo, a 0.13. So this was against the State of the Union address. So much like I would have said for Rampage on Friday, especially just comparing cable to cable numbers, like the State of the Union, it aired on all 4 major networks and multiple cable outlets. It was like over 32 million people watched the State of the Union. So NXT's audience dropped 10%, but they were actually up 7% in the demo. However, with all of the cable news coverage, they fell outside of the top 50 cable programs to number 70. So that was just, they were annihilated by all of the cable news programs, which, again, like Rampage's ranking, they're not going to stay at that ranking once news is just back to a regular week, like next week may be, in fact. So that's the NXT story. Canada, it did 66,000 viewers, down 15% from the prior week.
Yeah, understandable. We don't have the Dynamite number yet, but I mean, you're probably expecting a similar trend.
Yeah, I just saw it. It sounds like the ratings are delayed until tomorrow, so we won't know the Dynamite number until what's today? Thursday. We won't know until Friday. My days are all over the place. Impact tonight has the following lineup: Good Brothers Jay White and Chris Bay against the Gorillas of Destiny, Joe Doring and Diener; Eddie Edwards against Steve Macklin; Chelsea Green against Tasha Steeles; Madison Rain against Cassie Lee of The Inspiration; Jonah versus Johnny Swinger; and on Before the Impact, it's Brian Myers against Crazy Steve, happening on Access at 8 Eastern. And we've also got the newest, like a first run edition of New Japan on Access TV. So they're done with the old episodes, and now it's new episodes that they've created for Access. Final story here. We're going to revisit and go over the latest reporting about the Cain Velasquez story. There's been a lot of reporting since the court documents have now been put out and reported on. So I'm going to warn people that there is very graphic descriptions of sexual assault involving a minor. So if you want to tune out at this part, I do want to give everyone that warning ahead of time. So a lot of this comes from Mark Ramundi at ESPN. ESPN obtained the court documents, and this comes after Cain Velasquez was in court on Wednesday. He'll be back on Monday, and he is facing 10 criminal charges, including attempted premeditated murder, as well as multiple gun assault charges, and could face over 20 years in prison. He's currently being held in Santa Clara County, Maine jail, and is being held without bail. So once again, he's appearing on Monday back in court. The DA's office stated that he followed Harry Eugene Golarte, who is accused of molesting a relative of Cain Velasquez's. This resulted in an 11-mile high-speed chase where Velasquez allegedly rammed into the truck and then fired a .40 caliber shotgun that wounded Golarte's stepfather, Paul Bender, who was in the vehicle along with Golarte's mother. And the individual, Paul Bender, was struck in the arm and torso and was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Golarte has been accused of a lewd and lascivious act to a child under the age of 14 and was released from custody last Friday without bail, despite protest from the district attorney's office, and ordered to stay in home detention and stay 100 yards away from any child under the age of 14 while wearing an electronic monitoring bracelet. Now, in the court documents, the relative of Cain Velasquez, whose identity they are concealing, alleged that Golarte took them into a bathroom. This is at the home daycare that Golarte's mother runs and that he lives in the home. Took the child into the bathroom and allegedly touched their genitals and was told by Golarte not to tell anyone. The child said that this happened 100 times and saw other children go into the bathroom with Golarte. Golarte is denying these allegations, stated he once helped a child with their pants that were not put on correctly, and lives in the home where his mother runs the daycare. The mother said in the court documents she does not believe the allegations made against her son. So, I mean, he is going to have his own day in court, and as will Velasquez here as well. You know, we've reported on this every single day, Way. It's a horrible, horrible story on so many levels. I understand a lot of the public support of Cain Velasquez, but it's just, this could end up just being a really tragic story for Cain Velasquez, who maybe you can rationalize what he did, but this is someone that, as it states, could face, multiple decades behind bars.
Yeah, it's a horrifying story, and more horrifying the more we learn about it every single day here. I think, oh man, I think like so many people who hear that completely understand why somebody like Cain would do what he did, but it doesn't excuse, somebody basically taking the law into their own hands and possibly harming. I mean, he did harm somebody who was not the person who's been accused here, and really just making everything worse. We're talking about Cain Velasquez now, who is likely going to be separated from his own family for quite some time after this, and it really is just a real tragedy all around. So God,
and it's probably going to be like a major national story. Like if this goes to trial, it's like what is a jury going to interpret here in terms of this guy doing something that you can't condone, but I'm sure there are many, especially many parents out there that can understand like how
the law is the law.
The law is the law, and that's what you are being asked as a jury to adjudicate. It's just a horrible story all around, and I just to see a guy that could spend a significant portion of his life behind bars, that's a real possibility. So anyway, that I want to save that for the end, just because of the specific details. I know that it may be troubling for some to hear that, but I think important to go over as well all the facts of the case that we have known to us. So that is going to. Oh,
we have a couple super chats here from people who are tuning in live with us at youtube.com/postwrestling. We're normally live every day at 1 p.m. Eastern. Of course, today delayed because of the Pat McAfee Vince McMahon interview, but we will be back tomorrow. Not only that, John, we will be back Friday night right here after AEW Rampage and WWE SmackDown for our live post show. So those of you who missed out yesterday, we went live after Dynamite. We're going to go live after Raw. We're even going to go live here after what's the pay-per-view? AEW Revolution. On Sunday night. So we are doing live podcasts every time there's a big show, basically, coming off of all of these events on youtube.com/postwrestling. And it'll be very exciting. I love all the activity in the chat room. Hello, everybody there. And as always, you have the opportunity, if you want to get a question read on air or just a comment, to send us a super chat through YouTube. And the first one comes to us from David Rodriguez, who sends a $2 super chat and asks, do you think Vince really does like the praise? I think this is in reference to him saying throughout the interview that he doesn't like praise.
No,
how do you feel?
I take him at face value there, and historically, like that's not an exaggeration that he demands people not to thank him during the Hall of Fame speeches. I think it honestly probably, whatever it is, makes him uncomfortable. Like whatever it is, I believe that to be completely legit.
He doesn't seem like somebody who needs it. I mean, the man's kind of gone through a lifetime of success and probably plenty of congratulation, So at this point, I do believe him, but come on, everybody secretly likes it.
Are we going to get, like a decade ago, there was like the Cranky Vince account. Do you think the modern era Twitter parody account is going to be Vince McMahon's sneakers?
Sneakers? What do you mean?
Did you see the running shoes he wore?
I didn't pay particular attention to the sneakers. Okay, what kind of sneakers were they?
They looked like
what brand?
I couldn't even make it out. I don't know.
Interesting.
They might have been like Under Armour.
Of course, yeah, the deal, right?
Yeah. Well.
Okay, interesting. Anyway. Like he came across to me like very a bit more spiritual than I think I expected Vince. Like he was all about gratitude.
That was the third. That was the third brain. The third wheel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe like Vince at this age is just like all about like positive. Like one of my favorite lines throughout the interview was like
Things
he
of
says,
that nature.
"I don't like to be negative because when you're negative, it's a double negative because you're preventing yourself from being positive." So, it's a fascinating man as always.
Interesting man. Yes.
Up next, we go to Ruza, who sends an $8 Australian dollar super chat, who says, "This was fascinating. I'm surprised the ROH purchase was brought up. But the real question, him and Linda, are they still together? Haha, swearing Vince was refreshing." Well, I haven't heard any otherwise. Maybe Ruva is asking because there was a portion of this story where he was talking about going to the professors to change his grades. He says, "My wife at the time, Linda," before he, I think, corrected himself and said, "My wife."
Yeah. I'm not gonna speculate on stuff like that and people's personal lives. It's just I don't think that's.
We have no way of knowing.
Yeah. Anyway. So there you go. Are those all of our super chats?
That's it. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, we are back on Friday, back at our normal time slot of 1 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be doing a whole preview of the AEW Revolution pay-per-view, and then Friday night on this channel, live at 11:15 p.m. Eastern time. We will be going live for the first portion of the show. If you are a member at postwrestlingcafe.com, you'll get the entire show, as always, on Friday nights. So that is when we are going to be chatting with you. And then coming up, we've got a new edition of Post Pro Res with myself and WH Park that will be dropping early Friday. And then we've got a UFC 272 post show Saturday night with Phil Chertok and Eric Marcotte on this channel. And Sunday night, Wai and I will be live right after Revolution with our post show. So a packed weekend of shows here at postwrestling.com. If you are just discovering us, finding us on the YouTube channel, thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can find much more at postwrestling.com. Andrew Thompson churning out stories left, right, and center. He's got multiple wheels going. First wheel, second wheel, all through 10, 11, and 12 wheels he's got going on at the same time. So a very busy man. And that is going to wrap things up. Thank you to everybody for tuning in to the Post Daily News Show.